My name is Nicole Lamberson, and I am a physician assistant, and I'm a member of the Medicating Normal team, where I volunteer doing outreach for the film and facilitating important conversations like this one. Today, I am really excited to bring you this interview with Melanie Davis. Melanie has more than 25 years of experience as the manager of REST, which is REST, and stands for Recovery Experience Sleeping Pills and Tranquilizers. REST offers support, guidance, and advocacy for people in Camden and how do I say, is it Islington?
Islington, yes.
Islington, struggling with benzodiazepines and Z drugs. It was set up by Mind in 1988, and the service is now provided by the health and social care charity called Change, Grow, Live. Melanie has used her expertise to shape government policy as a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Prescribed Drug Dependency and at the Council for Evidence-Based Psychiatry. She has contributed to several committees and reports on the issue of prescribed drug dependency. Her insights have been featured in national media, including BBC Newsnight, the London Times, and the Daily Mail. And through her work with REST, Melanie has supported over 3,000 people to safely withdraw from benzodiazepines. Example of REST's work form part of Public Health England's framework on prescribed drug dependency, which is due to be published in 2022. Thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us today. And did I leave?
Pleasure.
Sure. Did I leave anything out of your introduction or anything you want to say?
I don't think so. I think obviously from when I started in benzodiazepines to now, there's just been so many wonderful windows of opportunity, especially recently in progress. So I have been involved in many different interesting initiatives over the years, but I think that captures it fairly well.
Great. So that kind of is a good lead in to the first question. Just how did you even come to know about issues with prescribed benzodiazepines and Z drugs, and that they even had potential to cause harm and withdrawal? Like, what made you become interested in the topic to begin with?
Okay, so obviously that's going back a long time. I was trying to visualize how I did first get interested in what obviously became my life's work. I was working in mental health at the time. There was a very small project that a lady had set up who had lived experience of this issue. And I was aware of that was one of the projects that was provided where I was working at the time. I was a lot younger then. It just struck me as something that didn't get the necessary attention that it deserved. I felt that people had an idea of what maybe taking illicit substances would entail, or some idea about, problematic drinking. If you just ask somebody in the street, what is an alcoholic, they might have some, obviously, misconceptions and some prejudicial views, but I think they perhaps had maybe experienced themselves or had a family member, they would have some idea. But I noticed whenever any questions came up about benzodiazepines, with prescribed drugs, people didn't seem to have much idea at all, and it just was frustrating to me. It didn't get the necessary attention. So I think that was the lead-in. But I had also had a friend when I was at school that I went to stay with, and it became very sadly evident over time that her mother had this issue. And me as a teenager, just I think, people think when you're young, things kind of shock and surprise you, but in many ways you just adapt to what's there. And I knew this lady was very incapacitated by the issue. And I think something clicked in my mind, just the quiet desperation this person was experiencing, that no one, as like a middle-aged woman just at home with very severe agoraphobia, no one was giving it much attention, as if it wasn't really important. But to me, I picked up the pain, and also how obviously that would have impacted her daughter, and that was a legacy there. So I think it clicked in my mind there. And then also as a teenager, I also had a boyfriend who, due to his anxiety, was prescribed Valium. And, again, my awareness there of, could there have been other approaches? Could there be other things that are offered apart from the tablets? So I already had the seed of it from what I'd observed. And then when I saw this project, it was just something I warmed to. And the people there were so genuine, so committed. And I went for the job, and I was offered it.
Yeah. So what do you think made you different, in the sense that it sounds like you understood the issue almost right away? And even in people, I find, anyways, from my own experience, who care about me, because I went through this myself, and they're invested in my life and me being healthy and well. But even when I gave them information and I tried to explain the problem, it was like, I've met so many people who just seem like so incapable of understanding that a doctor can prescribe you something that can cause such problems and devastation. So how do you think, even so early on when you were first starting, that it just made sense to you?
That is a really, really interesting question. And obviously I'm sadly told that, people, haven't always given you the support that you needed, because in addition to the original trauma that's caused from taking this medication, you then are sort of doubly traumatized when you're having to sit there not well, desperately trying to explain to people the harm that for a fact that they have caused you. And some of
Yeah.
that is just having, just trying to understand that some people just really don't get it. And that's why I think it's wonderful that there's these so many groups online where you can meet with people. And that's obviously what we provide at Rest, that immediate identification. Or if someone's phoning me up and being somewhat apologetic for whatever reason, I'm saying, you don't need to be like that. We get it, that the drugs have harmed you. We do believe that. We do understand. And, you've come to the right place. So yeah, it's an additional battle indeed. I'm just trying to think why that would be. I mean, obviously I did have respect to medical profession, so I wasn't coming from a hyper sort of anti drugs or, anything like that. But I guess I always believe just inherently that obviously any distress you go through in life, you are going to know yourself better than someone else can, So I looked at it a little bit like, okay, so if I break my knee, somebody who is a physician will know far more about what's going on in my knee than I will. And I trusted to that, and I would trust their judgment. But I don't think I could believe that, with anxiety or depression, that someone could know better than the person experiencing it. I just always felt that.
Yeah.
And I just could not see how any type of medication could be that magic bullet.
Mm-hmm.
When they're prescribed things like insomnia, anxiety, not really prescribed for depression, but you can have depression in with the mix, how that could be kind of cured by a pill, I never really believed that.
Yeah.
I think pharmaceuticals might be an option for some people, as just at certain times for part of the issue, but I never wholeheartedly believed in that route. I always thought there's other things that you can try, because obviously there, even with people who don't have the devastation that people who are using a benzo service like ours have experienced, there will be side effects, there will be a downside.
Yeah.
So obviously it just made sense to me if there was other things that you could try, or just the conditions that we experience in society have surely got a lot more to do with what we suffer than
Mm-hmm.
anything a pill could address. So I just always fundamentally believe that.
Yeah.
Plus, I'd obviously had the example of these two individuals who I could see were not improving. If anything, they were getting worse. Obviously, I maybe didn't make the immediate connection that the drugs were really not helping, or I could see they were not healing, they were not curing the problem, but I probably took longer to see that they were actually a huge part of the devastating experience that the person was undergoing.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about rest. What is rest for people who don't know, and where is it, and how long have you worked for rest? And do they only just do benzos and Z drugs or other medication as well?
Yes, so REST has been going since 1988, set up by my predecessor. I started in kind of round about the early 90s, so I've been managing the project since then. It is a project just principally for benzodiazepines and the Z drugs, because obviously they work on the same receptors in the brain. People in the group may take other, maybe do take antidepressants as well, or have done, or any other, psychotropics, or sometimes even illicit drugs, or, do have or have had an alcohol problem. So there's kind of a huge variety, but it was obviously initially set up for people who take them as prescribed. But we see anybody who experiences a difficulty with benzodiazepines. And it's based in Camden, and we're funded for the boroughs of Camden and Islington. So Islington is just the borough that immediately flanks Camden. So we see people from those boroughs. So at any one time, I guess I would have a caseload of about 70 people. And in terms of accessing the group, the pool is about 30 people. They don't all come on the same night. It's an open group. It's not a treatment program. It's peer-led. It's very informal in that extent of when people can access it. It's the agenda is completely driven by the clients themselves. So it's a range of services. There's the group. There's the advocacy from me, which could mean a letter to someone's GP. The main thing I get asked for is that somebody's being withdrawn, an over rapid withdrawal. I do still, unfortunately, sometimes come across people who have been taking them off too suddenly, which we know to be terrible in a huge number of respects. But the message has got through, I think, largely in the UK, at least on those fronts, but it hasn't got through as to a realistic time frame for the taper. So often I'm there to slow it down. I could even be there to advocate for people to receive medication if they were wrenched off them too quickly and they need a stable period before they can do their taper. So that's an aspect of it. And obviously the presentations that we go and do, which I would do with the client, they would tell their story. I would give some information about benzodiazepines, which is not necessarily in this forum with the wonderful expertise that you have, but it would be just more basic than here, just to give people that understanding. And the other side of it would be the whole policy making side, and that really came about because quite often, obviously, as a non-medical person, I can't give medical advice and never would attend to. But if I did realise that the taper was over rapid for the person and it was having a negative impact on them, and it was in some cases over rapid to what the current guidelines would suggest, this was something I would obviously point out to a GP, either in person or by a letter. Didn't always go down well with varying results, but it would be easier obviously for me to say, well, the guidelines that we have do state, rather than, well, in my professional experience, or this is the stories we're hearing from the people that use our project, it would be stronger to show the guidelines. So that's where I wanted to get behind that, to get that changed. So what people have filtered, I'm filtering through what people have advocated via me, what they would have preferred, what they would like to see, what is there to kind of safeguard them. Obviously, I can relay that in training and try and get policy change that way through, organisations or with an individual general practitioner. But if we could get it changed so it's right across the UK, obviously in other countries, your own as well, all the better. So that's how I got involved in that side of it, although my own personal approach is strongly on, from the bottom up, that the clients know what's best for them and what they need, and my job is to advocate that for them.
Yeah. Okay. So how does it, you said sometimes it works talking to the medical providers and sometimes it doesn't. What do you do if you have someone who, say, is being taken off too quickly, you point to the guidelines and you write a letter advocating for them, and the doctor just is not cooperating with those recommendations, can you help the service user find an alternate physician? Or
It's difficult. I must say it usually, I would say, I've got to say a good 95% of the time they have been amenable to what I'm advocating. I mean, in the initial instance, I kind of try with a person, maybe role play what they could say or some suggestions, because obviously it's better if that, all round, if that can be the case. If that doesn't work, I can try the letter, which I would say usually, because I put it in a very cogent way, and the doctor has only got a certain amount of time with the person, whereas I can say, well, I can support them through a week, they can get involved in these activities, they can come to the group. So it's a kind of shared care with the doctor. I'm not coming in any oppositional way to them. So there's not usually a good reason for them to not, sort of see the sense in that sort of plan, that shared plan that we've got together.
yeah,
But on the occasion where that hasn't worked, then we do step it up to actually going in. It can be difficult. I guess it's a case of maybe saying to the person, I can't maybe meet all their need on this occasion of exactly what they would have liked, but try and negotiate something between the GP and what we would have thought. So if they were trying to do a withdrawal plan in a few weeks, we were asking for maybe 6 months to a year, then we maybe go for 3 months. It's preferable to the 3 weeks. So we can revisit it and maybe just get something in there to say, look, if the person's really struggling, can we have some flexibility here?
yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a case of, negotiation really at that point. But I would say that mostly they have been amenable.
Yeah, that's great, Melanie. Just being in the United States, before we got on here, we were talking about how we don't really have anything like that here. And just having someone to advocate for you, especially when you're in such bad shape, if you've been taken off too quickly and you are suffering so badly, is huge. I know so many, just advocating in the United States and interacting with people in this position over 10 years, there's so many people who could really use an advocate. So I know that's a big thing that I'm sure is super helpful to people using REST. So I think I remember that REST used to be with another organization, and then it lost its funding or something, and now it's with Change, Grow, Live, which is a drug and alcohol service. So can you tell us a little bit about who funds REST, and also with the new service, Change, Grow, Live, because it's a drug and alcohol service, does anyone who attends who doesn't really have a drug and alcohol problem, because, and you can touch on that, how a lot of benzodiazepine patients are just prescribed, they went to their doctor innocently and thought they were taking a safe medication. Is there any type of feeling like, oh, I shouldn't have to go to a drug and alcohol service for something like this, or has that gone over okay?
Well, it's a really interesting question, because it was obviously huge at the time. We were very happily situated with Mind in Camden. I'm still in touch with many of my colleagues. They very kindly allow us to still use the building for our support groups to provide continuity. Mm-hmm. We are funded by Camden and Islington commissioners, and their feeling was they wanted a wider resource for people to be able to access the service. Mm-hmm. So before we knew that, we weren't sure if we would continue, and I think you probably saw online at the time, the service users themselves launched several campaigns that we should continue, because we had recently been told that we, a model of good practice. We'd have people come in to review the service and very, very happy with it. And we also operated on a very, very small budget, sort of compared with anywhere else. So we couldn't really make sense of it. But we were successful. So having finished at Mind in Camden on the 31st of March. We started at Change Grow Live on the 1st of April, and due not in small parts to the efforts of my wonderful line manager, Kate Dallas, who is the service manager for several services that Change Grow Live run, including drug and alcohol, as you've mentioned, but also a homeless project. She has just been so wonderfully supportive of the service. It's been able to be as streamlined as it possibly could under the circumstances. There were a few people at the time who we would obviously ask data protection for their records, whether they could be transferred over. Didn't want that to happen. Obviously, we respected that. Some people then did subsequently phone up and still come after that. The majority did go across, and I think the main reason for that was the way it was so sensitively handled by Change Grow Live, and the way that Kate Dallas has so wonderfully allowed us to maintain our unique features of the project. So she has always used the language like, involuntary addiction or, dependency, and just has understood that. And one of the things she did quite early on was to have me in to talk to senior management of that organisation, because they have social care access across the UK, to speak about the unique properties of this drug and when it is prescribed. And we had a service user that has a kind of heart-rendering story. She's actually in protracted withdrawal still after several years. So she told her story. So we've been allowed to maintain our distinct features, and that's been in a number of respects, obviously in terms of our ethos, but also in sort of fairly pragmatic terms, because when you are in a drug and alcohol treatment, you have records kept on you for that and statistics relating to that are passed on. My system's been set up separately, so people are not reporting in to that system. So there's a lot that's been done differently to accommodate us, which I obviously really appreciate. Of course, we were very worried at the time that we would suddenly stop, and people were really quite desperate as to where they would go.
Yeah.
The other way it's worked out well is obviously there is a lot of resource there in terms of there are, dance groups, there's art, there's yoga, there's mindfulness. All of these things are free and are now open to the rest clients to access, which many of them do.
Yeah.
So actually, yes, we took a chance. Thank you very much, Kate Dallas and CGL, for taking us, because we were very worried there at the time, but it's we live to fight another day.
Yeah, that's great. So does everyone who comes to REST, do they want to withdraw totally, or how do you work with each individual patient or client?
Yeah.
Call them clients.
Yes. Well, as I've said, because it's very client-led, and that really goes through the whole project like a stick of rock. It's definitely not something I just went on a course and I now say that is definitely my approach and always has been. Yeah. So it really is at the point of assessment. So maybe someone would phone me up, or when obviously with the pandemic before, come into the office to maybe see me for an assessment. It really would be very much led by them. So there's absolutely no pressure on that at all. I would say the vast majority of people, are not feeling well on these medications, feel obviously a lot worse when they try to come off, and want to know a safe and careful way of doing that as much as can be possible. So I would say the vast majority of people want to reduce and ultimately withdraw entirely. Okay. We have maybe, it's going to probably be just a handful. It's usually by age that they feel that they can't take that on at their point in their life, or maybe on some heart medication and other things, and just think they're on a lower dose. Mm-hmm. Never say never. If obviously they wanted to try and come off, we facilitate that, but they are obviously very welcome at the group at whatever stage of what they're envisaging, because for me it's more about the quality of life rather than sort of being off or on. So there are one or two whose life is reasonably stable by it. They obviously, if they could have tried, they've been on like 40 years, if they could have tried say 20 years ago, they would have loved to, but they're just not, they just don't feel able to do that. So there's no pressure. There's an encouragement to think about a reduction or coming off, and obviously a lot of inspiration and motivation from people, because in the group some people who are off come back to inspire other people. And we had a lovely example recently of a young lady actually who is in protracted withdrawal and is able to join our group during the pandemic because she's actually signing on to the group via her bed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and what she really wanted to see was someone who had been in protracted withdrawal who got well. And I did have people on my books in exactly that situation, but due to confidentiality, we wouldn't be able to reveal who they are. So all I could do is when I spoke to them to just say, I know you haven't been to the group recently, great, because you haven't needed to be, but we do have someone there, would love to see you. And one night a lady came in and you could see the client that I had in mind, that her face fell. And what she thought was the person looked so well, that can't be the protracted withdrawal person that recovered. And it was. So that was amazing. So even for that gave her a lot of hope. So, you know, there are people that contact the project in that situation. And there are people who are just beginning their taper. There are people that got down quite low. We get a lot of people that are stuck on about kind of 4 milligrams and they're just finding it really hard to go any further, like, you know, palpitations when they try and maybe cut by just a tiny amount. So we do have people that, you know, sometimes get stuck at certain points. But as I say, the acceptance is right across the board. But yeah, the majority of people do use it they would like to withdraw and taper on this medication for sure.
And you mentioned the polypharmacy. I mean, it's almost hard these days to find someone who's only on benzodiazepines. I feel like some of that is because benzos cause so many problems that, you know, then the doctors start medicating the problems thinking it's new problems. But if someone is in rest and they manage to get off of their benzos and then they want to come off of the antidepressant, or do they stay in the project and use the services to do that as well, or no?
We aren't sort of funded, you know, for that, and my expertise isn't around that. Obviously, a lot of the discussions we have in the service about the validity of labels, why people put on in the first place, what psychosocial interventions they could do maybe instead of the medication or alongside the medication might lead someone to go along their own sort of path or journey to sort of explore a bit more into that. But it's harder for me to say sort of definitively on that. Not that I exactly say definitively on the benzos, but that is more my expertise. So I certainly could be fairly definitive as to say, oh, come off quickly. And, you know, some of these principles obviously are applicable to other class of drugs, as we know. In that circumstance, I mean, the vast majority of people do tend, from their own inclination to start with, maybe contacting us in the first place, or from what they learned subsequently, most people want to be free of a substance, be that prescribed or otherwise. So it often does tend to coming off other medication as well. But yeah, that isn't something that they would be eligible for the service having been on their benzos to continue coming. But the point of access, it would not be the antidepressants as such. Okay. Obviously, there are moves in the UK to get groups of that sort running, and I think that would be brilliant.
Yeah. So you talked about the support group that REST offers. What is that like? And how often does it meet and that kind of thing?
It's just the most amazing experience. I facilitate it with my co-facilitator, Jay, who is absolutely brilliant. And I think the balance across the both of us gives, you know, the unique flavour of it. I think it works really well. But the more that we're not talking and the group members are talking, that's what we would consider a success, because we want to put it over to the group. So it definitely would be, what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? And, you know, to some extent, someone could be looking and thinking you're not really doing anything, but there's an awful lot going on behind the background. Yeah. We sit in a round. We sit in chairs all together. We have a medication review. That's just to check in for what people are on. The reason we do that is obviously somebody in any given week may have, you know, lost a loved one and, you know, would want to be talking about their bereavement. And obviously we would give the time and attention over to that. And people are very generous in the group, especially with new people, to let them just, you know, express the pain and the trauma and what they're feeling.
Yeah.
But to keep the balance on the benzos, we just have that check-in at the beginning. I also think it's useful because some people might come, they might be on, say, 20 milligrams of diazepam, just beginning to think about, tapering down. And on that given night, somebody is off, somebody's in protracted withdrawals, and somebody's on 1 milligram. They're kind of thinking, is this a group for me? But I think it's useful if someone would say, I actually used to be on this amount, but as due to coming to the group and just doing it gradually, and this is how I did it. So yeah, that's another reason, so that there's that point of identification. I think that's what it's all about. And we would, we don't introduce the themes, but we do sometimes have speakers in, and that would be a theme regarding what the speaker was talking about on a given night. But otherwise, the agenda is very driven by the participants themselves. And there'd obviously be common themes, and a lot of those themes, anger with medical professionals who are putting them on in the first place, which we give a good space to discuss. We do have some group guidelines, so we do ask that people don't sort of name maybe local GPs to bash them. It's not a sort of gossip shop. It's the theme of maybe the pharmaceutical company, or what's happened to them. We get people's story, and we believe in that story. We don't see it as people hiding behind a story. We see that story as really valid, and maybe it's for the first time where someone has heard that, yeah, that did happen to you, yeah, that was awful. We also have that positivity in there as well, because I think there is so much to learn from this experience. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on someone, but some people have really flourished in life kind of subsequently.
Yeah.
Or even just the friendships they've made in the group, or other things they've had to think about in their life. It's some of it it's fairly intangible. Other things are much more tangible. But yeah, it's quite a miraculous mix what happens in that group, and I certainly love facilitating it on a week. It's my favorite part of the job, actually, is taking the group.
Yeah, that's great. I know, for people in the US, and some people form their own support groups, but most of us are just sort of online, and it's still, it's still support. You meet people, and if I didn't have a place like that, like you said, to express, and the anger and the feelings, and to connect with other people who are going through this, I don't know how I would have made it. So having a group in person is just like a bonus, I would think. Although, at one point I probably couldn't have gone because I was too agoraphobic and that kind of thing. But you do have people who come in, or like with the pandemic, did you guys have to go to virtual meetings for a little while?
We did, yes, and to navigate that. And, as I say, for the lady with the protracted withdrawals, it's actually been a bonus, because I say, I don't think she would have been well enough to come. Most people have understood the necessity and have gone with it. And then there's just been a few people that, they're not with us for now, and they'd like to come in subsequently. It just doesn't really work for them. They can't feel that connection.
Yeah.
But what I was also to say is, so it's for 2 hours, but half an hour is social time. So if it was in person, Jay and myself would withdraw to the room, and we put biscuits out and refreshments, and people go out on a patio, and that's a nice aspect as well, because as we know, people can get very isolated through this experience.
Yes.
And sometimes you might hear other conversations striking up, be it about sport, be it about music, about other things, and it's all those moments that can bring the healing about. So it's never kind of just purely about the drugs. It's quite relational, I would say, and it's about stressing people's strengths, not just the deficits.
Right.
I mean, obviously someone who really loved running, say, is not going to get up and do a marathon on coming off tranquilizers, very unlikely. But maybe somebody in the group they might like to go for a walk with on a local common or something like that. And it sounds like really simple things, and it's not like telling someone just to go for a walk when they're in extreme distress. It's not that either, but it's exploring and looking at what might work for people, and being curious and keeping a really open mind to what that might mean.
Yeah.
And then Jay and myself would discuss what feelings were coming up for us from the meeting, and saying, this individual seems a bit quiet tonight. Do they want to come in a bit more? Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they're just happy to listen. And we wouldn't put anybody on the spot, but we might then kick off the next half by saying, oh, we haven't heard much from you this evening. And it's having that attention. And then once a month, we see a counselling supervisor, and then we talk about the issues that came up in the group. Was there anything that we could have done differently? We could have done better. Any suggestions that they have of what we might bring. So there's that, and obviously I have my management sessions as well. I can bring things up there, so it's all confidential to the service. And so there's more going on behind it than might appear, just to keep everybody safe and obviously offer the best service that we possibly can.
So is there, once somebody's finished with their taper and they're done, what kind of support do you offer for post-withdrawal?
I mean, it would be the same. We wouldn't have, because we're so small, we wouldn't be able to tailor it, a special group for that category. So they would still be coming along. But we also have, it gets a bit overlooked because obviously the group is the thing that it's more visible for people to see that there's a group taking place. But we have 12 weeks formalised counselling for people. So somebody could delve into that for 3 months, and that could be around any subject.
Okay.
Not necessarily, benzos per se, although obviously that would be, I'm sure, a big part of it. But that is something, that people have embarked on a level of inquiry as, to maybe why they went on them in the first place, the distress and disappointment of what they've missed out on for the fact that they were on them. So we've had people, they were looking through a photo album, they want like a picnic with their children, they couldn't remember they were there. Or they were they remember they were at a funeral and they couldn't, people were saying, oh, you're so brave, but they were so kind of anesthetized by the drugs they couldn't cry. So they might be mourning the death of that person some 15 years subsequently, so that stuff will be coming up. So we can offer counselling for that, and that's not drug counselling, that's formalized counselling, different styles. And so for any kind of underlying issues or any issues that are left over from the experience, we can offer that. And as I said, a whole kind of raft of, I suppose, more creative and artistic opportunities for people to kind of jump into, which of course many do.
Yeah. I think I skipped over the fact that when patients or clients come into rest, even ahead of them wanting to withdraw, I think you had mentioned to me that rest can help them, because we know so many people, like part of the whole problem, I think, and this is just my opinion, with just diagnosing people with something so simple as like, oh, you're just depressed or you're anxious, as a diagnosis versus like looking at what's going on in someone's surroundings or in their life or the trauma that they've been through. And I think you had told me that that's part of the intake at rest too. Like you can help people before they even start withdrawing, get stable housing. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, exactly, Nicole. I mean, that whole approach would be my approach as well. As I've said, very sort of trauma informed and kind of non-diagnostic. But we work with the labels. If people did feel that was meaningful for them, we would work with that as well. It depends how they see it, and we would, be flexible to that. But certainly, as I've said earlier about maybe getting somebody scripted when they were taken off too suddenly, or ensuring that they receive their prescription so they can do a nice gradual stable reduction. It is very hard to do that when you're struggling with financial difficulties or just the basics of life that we all need. And certainly there have been those that have not had a roof over their head. They could be sofa surfing. So imagine trying to do that with, undergoing a withdrawal. And obviously some people don't want to tell people that they're on the medication. There's kind of there can be a lot of shame around it. There shouldn't be, but there can be. So, it's really important, I think, to sort of emphasize, what might be most important for the person at any given time. There's maybe never a good time to do it, but certainly if you were trying to secure, reliable housing, that would not be a time you would want to be, withdrawing or going into any type of withdrawal. So, yes, it's massively important that the person has this kind of structure around them, and this is where the project is very holistic, where it looks at the whole person and sort of picks out what would be most beneficial to them, and understanding, what's been done to people. And what's been done to people is also, the social situation that they find themselves in, and it's working with people, not at people. So yes, and in regard to that, obviously I always did do that through the letters, and what I could find to tie people in with and go along with them to support them. But at Change Grow Live, we do have actually some free legal advice available, which has been massively helpful, because obviously the way the structures are, often you need an actual medical letter to endorse what's being said by the client. If you then have my letter alongside that headed paper with like a social care charity, that's even more that, this person is accessing a service. And then you have the legal person to say, oh, could you say a bit more about that, or write about it in this way, to get the result, to put it all together, to take that case on for someone. So we have that as well. But I do think that's massively important if you're, would be in the process of being evicted, for me to kind of intervene at that point. The most important thing at that point would be to secure that housing.
Yeah.
So there's no rush. It's not saying, well, that's not the bit I really do, because that's what the person needs, and what the person needs, I will do my utmost to assist them on.
Yeah. Okay. Just for clarity, a comment about tapering in 12 weeks. I think you said something like 3 months, but that was in the context of a doctor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, at 12 weeks is we are funded to have some counselling. I wouldn't expect someone to come off in 12 weeks. I would say the usual, and I was giving the earlier example where I would hope that it would take months, if not years. But I was saying, if the doctor was absolutely adamant they wouldn't prescribe over a certain time, then we would go for what we could get off the prescription, and maybe try and then, say the person was struggling and look at it again. Yeah. So I was talking about accommodating to what was available, not what I would recommend. I would say that in my experience, people take at least a year to come off. It's very rare for me to see anything quicker than a year. Yeah. And I definitely wouldn't recommend, it to be done in, say, like less than, say, 6 months, because of I would like it to go as easy for the person as possible. And as we know, even doing a gradual taper, it still can be horrendous. Yeah. But you're obviously giving yourself a bigger chance, and I want to do anything to avoid a protracted withdrawal. So I was thinking, if someone was on 10 milligram diazepam Valium, and it depend on their age, how long they've been on it, we'd have to look at their whole situation. But I think that would most likely take at least a year for them to come off. So I would never be thinking in terms of weeks, months, and yeah, probably at least a year. So no, what I was saying is, with the powers that be, because I don't actually prescribe, trying to get the best result out of what was on offer at that time. But for myself personally, I would strongly advocate a very slow, gradual taper at the user's own pace. Okay. And even including that they say they don't want to come off, that I would support that as well.
Okay. And you've mentioned to me that some of the ex-service users of REST and people who actually even volunteered for REST will go on after they're done working at REST or using the services to take the REST approach into other jobs and areas. And so do you think that REST is a model that could be duplicated elsewhere in the UK? Could other boroughs duplicate it, you think, or other countries? Looking at what you guys have set up, would it be easy to
I think
sort
it
of.
really would. I think it really would be, of the political will for it to be provided and the funding. And obviously, over the years and even recently, I spoke to two psychiatrists in Berlin that were looking into setting up a deprescribing clinic. I'm always happy, to take a call from someone with, suggestions, encouragement, share some of our policies, maybe the guidelines we use for the group, if that would be helpful. Obviously, there's a kind of time restriction, but I'm more than happy to do that. So, yeah, I think it would. That it hasn't satellited out in any formalized way that somebody who there's a rest in Portsmouth or there's a rest in Southampton, not like that. But what I mean is, I think people working in this way, after they've attended rest, if they then go on, in like as a psychologist in National Health Service, or they go on to be with a medical doctor, whatever they go on to, social worker, I think it sits with them that, we give a lot of trust over to people. Obviously, we look at risk, we take everything into account, but we do work in a very, a way that's very curious for the person and very much believing that they know what's best for themselves and working with the strengths, not the deficits. I think once you've experienced that, because I can see that some people might, I can hear from people sometimes that they're quite worried about that, how that would be. But when you see it in action, it does work so wonderfully that yes, it is something that could easily translate over into other areas, and yes, satellite out for sure.
Yeah. Are you aware of other benzodiazepine groups in the UK? Are there many or just a handful?
There's unfortunately just a handful. Obviously, when I when I began in post, I did contact everyone that I was aware of that was out there, and sadly some of them have closed. But I've spoken at the Bristol Tranquilizer Project, their AGM, both of them. I have contact with the wonderful Belissa Fredericks, I believe you've had on the show. I know Mark Horowitz. There is a benzo kind of community, if you like. I had the honour to meet Professor Heather Ashton. I met Professor Lader. He was actually going to do a research project. Again, it was based on some of our clients. So yeah, over the years, I think it is something that I've always seen as, and I'm sorry if I've left anyone out that you're thinking, why didn't you say maybe? I'm just saying it quickly. I'm giving examples. It's what I would see very collaborative. And I would say that, apart from extremely subtle differences, we're all on the same page. I mean, when I hear you talk, I'm just thinking, yes, and more yes, tick, 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 because in the nature of these drugs, the effect they have on people, it's so similar. So even if you're in the States or you're in London, or you're a different age or a different gender or different ethnicity, these are the similarities. And this is where, we have this point of identification. So yes, I most certainly am in sort of like regular contact with other people working in this field, for sure, yes.
Great. So that kind of leads us into your work at the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Prescribed Drug Dependence and KEP. I know you've been involved in a lot of things. If you want to talk about some of the campaigning, or I guess in your bio, you talked about how the Public Health England framework is due to be published in 2022. If you want to talk about what that's about and how it will be helpful.
Exactly. Well, yes, obviously, I've been going up to Parliament for some time now, and on the different initiatives that I've been involved with, sometimes it's been more a case of just sort of thinking, there's a lot of people there, there's like a time limitation, you've only got a certain amount of opportunity to put something across. So I've usually focused on one thing. I've taken a client with me whenever that's been allowable and possible. And supported them to put their views across when we've been there. So that's been really for quite some time. And then so I was on the British Medical Association roundtable and the Department of Health roundtable. So different things have been published over the years, but I would say the latest endeavour that I'm on, I have more opportunity to. We met, for many hours over several months, about 6 months, I think it was in the end, looking at how we could get, ring-fence funding for this distinct area of prescribed drugs, how that might look, what we would need in terms of sort of staff to achieve that. When I say we, it wouldn't be the people there providing it, but as a suggestion, as like a template.
Yeah.
And there's many, very eminent minds there, sort of putting the views across, collating it all together. Obviously, I brought some things from the cliff edge, if you like, of what clients would have preferred to see and what they'd like to see. And those suggestions were put across. Independently, I also put in for REST, a submission from REST, which was accepted, the case study. So it's a submission to National Health Service England and National Health Service Improvement, and we were selected for the inclusion in it. So that will come out in 2022. Full name of it is Commissioning Framework Optimising Prescribing of Medicines which may cause dependence and withdrawal. And of course, we highly encourage, things of this nature to get the word out there, to get more funding, to get more understanding. And I try to always be optimistic, but it's important to say, obviously, when you've been going for many, many years, there's been a lot put in, but then we don't see the services. But I do believe this has been, there's been some time and attention given to it that's been different than I've experienced in the past. So I can just only be cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. When you're doing your campaigning, I mean, I always hear people say, oh, well, the UK has it figured out. They know, they know benzos are bad and they know not to prescribe them long term. It's obviously not people who are harmed by benzodiazepines saying that. It's, like doctors and that kind of thing. But then you see so many people from the UK showing up in the groups who are being prescribed benzodiazepines long term, and they're having horrible withdrawals. So it's like they can't really totally have it figured out. I mean, I feel like you guys are much more ahead than like the United States, but when you're doing your campaigning and you're going in and you're talking to the BMA and that kind of thing, how is the reception? Do you feel like they're believing this is a problem, that it's being heard?
Well, as I say, it's variable. When we're to the level where people are meeting for a committee, they are asking for opinions, then that's something to celebrate, isn't it? But as we know, it's to do with political will, it's to do with funding, that what people themselves consider is most important. And so yes, there's still a massive amount of work to do. The evidence speaks for itself, that there are there is another one now, but we were the only project in the whole of London that specialised in this, and we're tiny. There's me 4 days a week, and Jay, who I take the group with. That is not sufficient for the need. I have to turn people away if they phone up from another borough. And if you're lucky to live in Bristol, obviously there's 2 projects, but there's hardly any across the whole of the UK. So we've not arrived there by any manner of means. It does need to have the necessary time and attention to give it parity with other mental health resource, or other drug and alcohol. The same amount of attention that's put into that, it definitely needs to be given. And at the moment it isn't, but as I say, there is a real window of opportunity now, and I can only just celebrate people like sort of Dr. Anne Guy, that has chaired the committee that I've recently been on, and they really, really want to change. And many, many people that I've met over the years who also likewise have put a lot of time and energy. But yeah, there could still be so much more done. We just have to. What can you do? You can't give up. I will never give up. To the day I die, I will always try. So That's
Yeah.
the best I can say.
So I guess that is kind of a good statement to lead us into the last question here is, what do you think needs to happen for basically this to be fixed, or at least made, as best as possible for society? Like, how do we stop this happening to people unnecessarily? If you had, perfect world and all the money and, what would you like to see happen?
Oh, so much. I mean, that's a huge question, isn't it, Nicole? I mean, at a kind of extremely basic level, I would certainly like the guidelines to be strong enough that nobody is newly made dependent on this medication. That goes without saying. Perhaps, maybe it seems obvious, but that would save, thousands of people being distressed further down the line. So that would be a case of, medication reviews really, and maybe say, look, if you were a doctor, I do sympathise with the fact you haven't been sleeping for night after night. Who wants severe insomnia? It's hell. But if I carry on giving these sleeping pills for more than a couple of weeks, I will be creating another problem for you, which incidentally is going to be worse than what you're experiencing now. So I can't do that. So I really do need to refer you to,
Withdrawal causes severe insomnia, by the way, coming off.
Exactly. So maybe for a couple of nights or something like that, but then we are going to look to maybe refer you to a sleep clinic or, some other intervention, psychosocial. So certainly that.
Yeah.
I then think for people who are already dependent on it, there needs to be a lot more compassion for their situation, and certainly, some specialized clinics they can go to get the necessary time and attention that they so deserve. And that would come through funding. But obviously behind all of that, then there is a need, isn't there, for a fundamental change in society, for the fact that this many people are in the distress that they need, they are experiencing, mental health issues. And I think you've had other people on this that have, talked about the need for, good nutrition, exercise, light, all these things, the attention to be on that rather than, the solution to be found via a pill, basically, which it never will be, which I think we know in our heart of hearts is the case. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's, yeah. So, I mean, that's a huge question, but yeah, there's a lot of avenues to that. It's what's behind the situation, it's stopping the situation evolving, and then once it's evolved, to give support to people to get out of the situation. And then I suppose the other end of it is when you are out of the situation, having a different type of society where you can flourish, mm-hmm. not just survive, but kind of thrive,
Yeah, not be in a world anymore that,
Yeah.
someone is distressed and all we say to them is like, call this 1-800 number, or, we're so disconnected from each other.
Exactly.
And everything is so clinical. Just go to the doctor if you are having bad feelings instead of talking to people and that kind of thing.
Absolutely, Nicole.
Yeah. So lastly, I know a lot of people are going to watch this and say like, I want to go to rest. And, I know I've heard rumors, and I'm sure they're not rumors. I'm positive that they're true because people are so desperate coming off benzodiazepines that lots of Americans will call up the services in the UK asking for help. And so I just want you to make clear who REST can support and take as clients, and then if there's any contact information or where people can find REST if they happen to be in the location that they can benefit from the services.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. I mean, very, very sadly, just at the moment, we are a tiny service. There's basically me 4 days a week and my co-facilitator take the group. So we are only funded for the boroughs of Camden and Islington. So if you're fortunate enough to live there, we would love to hear from you. Obviously, just Google up REST. You'll see us there. There's quite a lot on the internet about us. Sadly, I have had calls where I have had to say to the person, to manage their expectation. I'm sorry, I can't help. I probably even don't have the time, but even if I heard someone's whole story and then I'm not able to offer them the service on the end of it, that would be pretty tragic. So yeah, sadly at the moment, just for those 2 boroughs.
Okay, got it. All right, so it looks like we are right at an hour. Is there anything else you want to add or say before we close?
I think that just about covers it. Thank you so much to have me on your show. And just to say, it's very hard to describe from when I started it with this, before there was the internet, if you can kind of imagine that.
Yeah.
It was, you very rarely met anyone who understood about it, who knew about it. Just now, this expansion of this sharing of knowledge, I just think it just makes the kind of opportunity for the mutual aid that much more. I think it's only been a bonus. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
And all the information that you can put out there. I mean, there were people who had their own sort of libraries where they collated a lot of information, in hard copy. But that couldn't, that would be difficult to share, wouldn't it? So the internet has just been a fantastic boon. So it's lovely, meeting people like you. And I think it's fabulous what you're doing. And I think the Medicating Normal film, I just wanted to cheer for that, because when I saw a film about, taking on the tobacco industry, I thought, oh, we so need that for benzos. I wonder, couldn't someone make a film about it? And it finally happened. So fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking today and for all your work too, Melanie. We need to clone you and put you all over the world, and rest services. I mean, that would be like my dream, is that people have a safe place to go where they're understood and they have someone to help them through this, for all the people who are on it. And like you said, to stop doing it to people. So maybe we just don't need these services going forward as much.
Yeah, that would be the ideal. The ideal would I would be out of a job ultimately. That would actually be the ideal.
Yeah. Right when you're ready to retire, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. There are more interviews to come every week or so here live on our Facebook page, and they're always listed under the events tab on our Facebook page. I think next week, Angie will be interviewing Dr. Awais Aftab, if I pronounced his name correctly. If you haven't seen Medicating Normal yet, check out our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch. You can also look at our YouTube channel for more content. And if you'd like to support our outreach efforts to bring the film and conversations like this one to communities worldwide, you can make a donation at medicatingnormal.com/donate. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thanks again, Melanie, for being here and for all your great work. And we will see you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.